Alright, today's book is Syllabus Design by David Nunan. This is part of a book in the series for language teaching, a scheme for teacher education. So yes, obviously this is another book for professional development. This is not a book for pleasure reading. With apologies, I do not have anything intelligent to say about the content of this book. Sorry. I'll try and make a few general comments about the reading experience, but yeah, I'll try and save you some time. There's probably not going to be a lot of useful content in this review. So I read this book for what I imagine is the same reason that most people read it, is the Delta Module 3. So in my ongoing Delta story, I've got Delta Module 1 and 2 wrapped up now, and then trying to finish up Module 3. Yeah, if you're not familiar, in Delta Module 3, you've got to design your own syllabus, and you've got to do a lot of reading on the literature about syllabus design and incorporate that into your report somehow. So my school library, and by the way, apologies for the fact that this is obviously a photocopied version. That's the way it was in my school library. Anyways, my school library had a couple of the books that are normally cited for this. Designing Language Courses, A Guide for Teachers by Kathleen Graves, and Syllabus Design by David Nunan. I grabbed them off both. I grabbed these both off the shelves, and I thought maybe Designing Language Courses would be more applicable for the Delta Module 3 assignment, which you do have to design your own course. So I picked this up and I got a little ways into it, but yeah, it was interesting, and I may well come back to this book and finish this off, and then I'll give it a separate review on its own. It was interesting and it was well written, but it was a little bit too discursive. And the thing about the Delta Module 3 is the timing. So I had a report that I needed to get finished by the end of the week. And this one here was the Syllabus Design by David Nunan. The first few chapters, at least, were very heavy on the terminology, which is exactly the type of thing that you want when you're doing Delta Module 3, because you've got to cite all these terms and incorporate them and define them. And sure enough, this had a lot of stuff on process syllabus versus product syllabus, and analytic syllabus versus synthetic syllabus. You know, right at the beginning of section 3 on Delta Module 3, you've got to talk about the difference between, I think, goals and objectives, and that's very clearly in this book here in this section here labeled objectives. So yeah, in terms of just getting at the terminology as fast as possible, this book seemed like it was a lot more efficient. That plus in the opening pages of Kathleen Graves' book, she talks about how she used to teach out of this book for her classes anyways. She did a class on syllabus design. So like I'm sure reading her book would be very instructive, because she would probably go on to expand on a lot of stuff. But I thought, well, for the first book, might as well go for the original one here. Right, so this book is part of the Language Teaching, a Scheme for Teacher Education series. I've read one book in this scheme already, which is Speaking by Martin Bygate. So it's a whole series of stuff. And in my review of Speaking by Martin Bygate, which I've also reviewed on this channel, I complained a lot about the format of that book. And in this review, I'm going to complain a lot about the format of this book. So there will be a lot of similarities, maybe. So obviously there is a set format which is set off by this series. Or they keep calling it this scheme, a scheme. I don't know if that's a British thing, but they mean series. Yeah, I don't really like the format of these books. I'll get around to complaining about that later. I will say just off the bat, though, that David Nunan is one of the most respected people writing in English as a second language education methodology books. I've actually not read one of his books cover to cover before, but I've read parts of some of his other books before and found it to be quite readable. And yeah, I've enjoyed what I've read of him in the past. So keep that in mind, because I didn't entirely enjoy this book. But I'm sure he's a talented writer, and I've enjoyed some of his other books in the past, or the sections I've read of them. So this is divided into 3 sections. Section 1, defining syllabus design. This is what you really want here in terms of the Delta Module 3 stuff. This is where all the terminology is defined. It's a little bit dense, the reading, so you know, I would get to the end of a section and I'd be like, oh, I'm not really sure that all sunk in. But again, I guess that is kind of part of the reason why I picked this up in the first place, is because I wanted kind of as much information dense. I wanted to get as much information in as short as time. And that goes up to page 71, is section 1. And really, if I would have had any sense, I think I would have stopped there. Especially because, you know, the advice you get for Delta Module 3 is you shouldn't be reading books cover to cover anyways. You don't have the time. You should be doing the old thing what you do for any university level research essay, is you just find the parts that are relevant and read those. I've got a bit of a quirk, though. I like to finish off books. I like to say, okay, that book I'm done reading it, and it's especially true since I started doing these book reviews, is, you know, you can't do a book review until you've finished off the whole book. So I decided to go on and finish the whole book. You know, it's short. The whole thing is only 53 pages, so by the time you get to 71, you're pretty much halfway done. But yeah, it is very much, I guess, my own fault for trying to read this book cover to cover, even though it's not the type of book that lends itself to being read cover by cover. Section 2 is demonstrating syllabus design, and this sounds like a cool idea in theory. They give excerpts from several real-life syllabuses here, and then you're supposed to critically use what you learned in Section 1 to examine these excerpts of syllabuses here, which sounds really cool, but it's all questions. So they have like a bunch of tasks, right? Like task 77, task 78, here's the syllabus over here on this page. So you're supposed to do all the work yourself, and I don't know, obviously this is not convenient if you're just trying to read a book, right? Especially if you're on a deadline. If you had like the whole year to study this book, then you could obviously get a lot more out of it. But then as well, I think I would have been, I'm not sure if I would have done the task regardless, because I don't really have the time at this point. But even if I did have the time, I would want there to be some sort of answers in the back so you could check your answers. And there's nothing. Now, some of these tasks, some of them have kind of very objective answers, like, you know, match the criteria to the different sections of the book, something where there could be a very clear kind of right or wrong answer. Some of them are a lot more subjective, but I've seen books like this in the past where even for the subjective type questions, they do have a commentary. You know, not something that says, okay, this is the right or the wrong answer to it, but the points that maybe you could have thought about where you were answering that question. So, yeah, the tasks here without any answers or commentary or guidance, I didn't really like so much. I think maybe the authors were thinking that the point wasn't really the right or wrong answer. The point was just being able to work through it and get your brain thinking. But I don't know. But I really like having more guidance from a textbook when I'm working through the tasks. So as a consequence, section 2, I felt like I was just reading through a bunch of questions about syllabuses that had been selected without really getting as much guidance as I would want. And I don't feel like I got a lot out of section 2, and I felt like it was a bit boring. And then section 3 was really boring. Section 3 is a list of different research projects that you could take on by yourself. And at this point, the book is obviously not even trying to be engaging. So, you know, here's part from section 3. So, task 18, aim. To identify some of the assumptions underlying the language curriculum of your institutions. Resources, as for task 117. Procedure, study the documents and make brief notes on the following belief about language teaching and language learning incorporated into the documents. Assumptions about learner needs, assumptions about the context in which the learning occurs. Make a list of questions you would like to put to the authors of the documents you have studied, evaluation, etc. And then it goes right, it's followed immediately just by another task. Task 119, aim. To compare the idealized view of the curriculum with what actually happens in reality. Resources, as for tasks 117 and 118. And I wrote in the margins here, I am so asleep right now. This is just boring to read through. You know, like, again, if I had 6 months to study these books and had the time to do all these tasks, maybe. But yeah, just reading through this was just so boring. I did my best with this. Now, again, I think probably it's my own fault for trying to read this book cover to cover. It's not meant to be cover to cover. I've got this quirk where I feel like it's incomplete unless I finish the book. I don't know what's wrong with me. But that is the way I prefer to approach books, is I prefer to read them cover to cover and then do a little review of it and then move on to the next book. I feel like that's my preferred way to learn from books. But some books don't cooperate with that. And this book is obviously one of them that does not. I mean, even in section 2, there were a lot of tasks that seemed like they would take up a lot of time. I think I wrote in the margins of one. Yeah, it says task 76. To what extent do these statements represent the sorts of things which learners might wish to do in real life? How comprehensive is the list? Are there any omissions or areas of overlap? Match the all project goal statements with the units from the Cambridge English Course Book. English Course Book 1. And I just wrote here, now I'm not doing that. Way too much trouble. Yeah, again, if I had 6 months to study this book, maybe it would have been different. But yeah, I mean, it does beg the question, like, how many people really do these tasks? I've got to figure most people are like me, unless maybe they're using this book for a university course, in which point maybe the professor is directing them to do some of these tasks. But yeah, for a self-study book, this kind of format is just not great. Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I guess I want to make sure I say this clearly. Probably what you should do with this book, especially if you're doing Delta Module 3, is don't read it cover to cover like I did. Just, you know, go to the index, find some of the process syllabus versus product syllabus, the stuff that's defined, pull out some key quotes from this, and just don't try and read it. Yeah, that being said, actually, section one was readable. If you're going to read it, read section 1. And it was kind of heavy on the terminology, which is what you want for Delta Module 3, but maybe not what you want for pleasure reading. But there was some interesting stuff in here. Like he talked about the pros and cons of having learning outcomes for a course, and I thought that was interesting. Like some people say, how can you possibly have a course without learning outcomes? Like, if you don't know what it is you want the learners to learn, that course is setting it up for disaster. But then other people say, you know, there's so much complex stuff that happens in the classroom between the learners and the teacher, and you just never know where the opportunities for learning are. So you're reducing a course, or you're taking away the complexity of a course when you try and state the learning objectives. And they also said, and I thought this was interesting, they said teachers on their day-to-day planning do not think about course objectives. They just think about, you know, how to get through this page of the textbook or how to engage the learners. And I thought, yeah, that's really true. I mean, in all my years of teaching, I seldom think about the course objectives when I'm planning my daily lessons. You just think about what's useful for the learners at this point in time, not what are the course objectives. Because yeah, I mean, this is especially true at schools where teachers get handed a syllabus, which I think is most schools. You're just not interested in these outcomes which somebody else has designed. You're interested in what you think would engage the learners on this particular day. And then the test at the end is just some sort of minor annoyance that you deal with somewhere or the other. So that's something that really rang true with my own experience, but I had never kind of I'd never thought about it exactly in that way before. So that was interesting. Actually, I take it back. There were a few interesting things in the first section of this book. Talking about the synthetic syllabus versus an analytic syllabus. Synthetic syllabus is when you have a bunch of different structures and you teach them one at a time. The idea like synthetic, like it's all going to come synthesize together later. Like, you know, you learn the present perfect one day, you learn the past simple the next, you learn the past perfect the other day, and all these grammar structures are intended to synthesize. Now, I mean, as David Nunan says, people are very skeptical about whether a synthetic syllabus does work, whether this all does come together or not. But what I thought, I mean, that's so far so simple enough, but what I thought was interesting is he talks about a grammar syllabus, and then he talks about a functions and notions syllabus, right? Because in the 1970s, the functions and notions were supposed to replace a grammar syllabus. And he said, this is actually still a synthetic syllabus. It seemed like it was this big revolution at the time, but functional language is still teaching structures. Notions are still structures or vocabulary. So he said this wasn't actually the big switch people thought it was just another type of synthetic syllabus. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's interesting. So he talks about Krashen's natural approach syllabus. I take it back, actually. The first section of this book was interesting. There was a lot of stuff to chew on. So I guess I'd recommend the first 70 pages of this. What did bug me, though, and this is the same thing that bugged me in Martin Bygate's speaking book, which was another book in the same scheme, is on every page you have tasks. Now, this isn't quite as bad as Section 2 and Section 3. I mean, in Section 3, it's all tasks. In Section 1, it's still mainly information, but you can see, I don't know, can you see this? There are just so many tasks. Like here is just a random page I just opened to, and you have task 50, and then some more text, and then task 51, and then another paragraph, and task 52. So it is a little bit hard to get immersed in the reading when there are all these tasks. And again, like I was saying before, there's very little guidance given on these tasks. Like there's no answers you can check in the back, there's no commentary on them. Although sometimes you do get the sense that the questions themselves are not so much questions as they are statements. For example, there's a section on the natural approach, right? Krashen and Terrell's thing. And then the task 51, it says, do you agree with any of these principles? Consider the principles you do agree with. Do you think we need empirical evidence on these, or are they just common sense? Do you think that Krashen and Terrell can legitimately claim authorship of principles such as develop communication skills? For which principles would you like to see firm evidence? So, I think these questions are pushing the reader somewhere, right? They're very much pushing the reader to say, okay, Krashen and Terrell do not have any evidence to back up their claims, is essentially what he is saying here through a bunch of leading questions. Or at least that was certainly my reading of that. So some of these tasks the questions do seem to be a way of sneaking in opinions. But yeah, I mean, here's the very next page. Task 53, task 54. There's just so many tasks here which mess up the reading experience. And then, what gets really frustrating is he'll have the task after the text. Well, not always, actually. Sometimes the task is before the text. And there are a couple points where this really gets annoying. For example, here, page 67. He's talking about performance objectives. And he has a list of arguments criticizing performance objectives on list A. And then the list of arguments responding to those criticisms. So I read through list A, and I'm reading through list B, and you know, you'd assume like one-to-one here, right? Like the argument here matches up with the response here. But it seems completely random, and nothing's lining up with each other. And I thought, well, okay, it's just a random list of arguments for and against. And then I turn the page, and I get to task 65, and it says, match the arguments from list A with the counter arguments from list B. And I'm like, right, so that's what I was supposed to be doing. I mean, they should have put this here in front of the reading, not behind it. And again, this was the same problem I had with the previous book I read in this same series, which leads me to believe maybe part of the problem is with the series editors and not the author. I don't know. But at any rate, I found it annoying. And it's especially ironic because there's a principle in English language teaching. This gets drilled into teacher training courses. You always give the students a task before you give them a text. In other words, you never say, okay, read this story, now answer these questions. You say, these are the questions you need to answer, now read the story. Something that gets drilled into all new teachers teaching English is to always give the students a task first and then the text. Which makes it ironic that a book on teacher training can't get that simple thing right, that they put the task after the text. Not all the time, to be fair, but a number of times. It annoyed me. Yeah. So what else to say about this? I don't really have the expertise to critique the stuff in here. This was the first book I've read on syllabus design. So I'm not going to be able to give any intelligent commentary on the content, other than, like I said before, section 1 I thought was interesting that Nunan did get into the arguments and counter-arguments about syllabus design for a number of different facets. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to think. I think that's really all I might have to say about this book. In conclusion, probably most people aren't going to read this because, I mean, who reads this for pleasure reading? Suspect if you do pick it up, you're picking it up for Delta Module 3. In which case I'd advise maybe reading the first 70 pages in full if you have the time, and then just stop there. Don't go on to sections 2 and 3. Okay.